be sponsoring this morning's post-election analysis event. I believe this is the third post-election event that Rasky has sponsored, and as a top government relations and communications firm, we're constantly navigating both Congress and the Biden administration on behalf of our clients. So the Rasky team, including my colleagues George Cronin and Justine Griffin, are excited to be here today to hear from one of the country's top political analysts.
Who's that?
But first off, I'd like to thank Jim Brett and Larry Zabar and the entire New England Council team. There is no organization that puts forth more networking, high-level engagement events, and substantive briefings than the Council. It's just nonstop, and I know the Rasky partners and all the members of the New England Council get incredible benefit from all the work that you do, so thank you. Next, I'd like to recognize Jonathan Allen. Jonathan is an award-winning journalist and New York Times best-selling author who covers national politics for NBC News. Formerly the Washington Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News and the White House Bureau Chief for Politico, Jonathan is a winner of the Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for Reporting on Congress and the Sandy Hume Memorial Award for Excellence in Political Journalism. He has been a frequent political analyst on national television programs for the past 15 years and teaches a course on presidential politics at Northwestern University. Jonathan has authored 3 books with Amy Parnas, including Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency, as well as 2 books on Hillary Clinton, which are both New York Times bestsellers. We're lucky to have Jonathan here this morning, and we're all eager to hear Jim and Jonathan discuss the election and what it means. We'll all leave this morning's event smarter for having been here. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Jim Brett and Jonathan Allen.
Great.
That's a little pressure.
Huh?
I said that's some pressure.
No pressure. No pressure at all. Thanks, Graham. And thanks to Rasky again for stepping up to plate and being our sponsor this morning. Bank of America, thank you very much for hosting this morning. We're delighted to have so many of our friends here today. Let me just say that we have one more event, and that's it, I think, for the end of the year. And that's later this week, Thursday, we'll be in Washington for the Secretary of Labor, who will be speaking to the New England Council. And many of you already signed up, believe it or not, who want to come down, as well as all of our members who are in D.C. So it should be a great event. But that'll be it for the year. It's been a great year, to say the least, and so many events. But today is just a fun event for me, being a political junkie and knowing our guest speaker, his background. He's just a terrific, he gives a terrific insight on what is going on in Washington, and we're blessed to have him here today. So let me just ask a couple of questions, and then we could get into, if we have time permitting, anyone who has a question here. But, you know, Jonathan, last Friday we were in New Hampshire. We had Senator Jeanne Shaheen speak, and she was not happy, to say the least, with the news coming out of the DNC Rules Committee saying that New Hampshire would not be first in the nation in 2024, and they would share the second primary with Nevada the same day, but South Carolina would be number 1. And she said that we will fight, and we have the state law that says our election would be held 30 days before anyone else. Your thoughts on how DNC is going to play out? That's the Rules Committee, but they'll be voting in January, February. How do you see this playing out?
So that's a great question. Let me just say, Jim, thanks for having me. Graham, thank you for the introduction. I don't know where you went, but I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to everyone who came this morning at 8 a.m.
8 a.m.
You know, it's early everywhere, and I'm glad that this is a day. I'm glad that this is a day where the Patriots are playing Monday Night Football, so that nobody's in a bad mood this morning.
Ooh, yeah.
And I mean, I'm rooting for them tonight.
Of course.
But you know,
Yeah.
I know sometimes
Yeah.
it's rough. As far as New Hampshire's first in the nation place and how that plays out with the Democratic Party, I mean, I think it would be a shock if the president's plan didn't go forward. I mean, I think that the full DNC, they're unlikely to deal him a rebuke headed into what they think is going to be a re-election battle against Donald Trump, or potentially against Donald Trump. I think they're going to think that need for unity is I think Democrats still feel it right now. So if that were to be overturned by the full DNC, I think that would be a surprise. It would be an upset.
So what can New Hampshire do about it?
Well, I didn't notice until the other day. I was looking at the map again how much New Hampshire can look like a middle finger, and I think I think that's basically what New Hampshire's likely to tell the DNC, right? I mean, New Hampshire's got a law says they go first. I think they're going to abide by that. I think they will accept whatever penalty the Democratic committee puts on them, and if that means that there are fewer delegates to a convention where you're going to get a rubber stamp of Joe Biden, probably get a rubber stamp of Joe Biden running for renomination, then so be it. My guess is that all of those delegates, or whatever the punishment is, they'll be taken away at the end, as is typically the case. I think the bigger question for New Hampshire going forward is what happens in 2028. 2024, you're not likely, at least on the Democratic side, you're not going to have a competitive primary. And the Republican side, obviously, is not doing the same thing. So the question is, does that sustain? The Biden plan would revisit every 4 years what this primary calendar looks like. And so now you have a new bunch of stakeholders that have a desire to keep things kind of the new status quo. So I think it's a long-term move away from New Hampshire, but New Hampshire's in a better place than, say, Iowa, which just got kicked out.
So President Biden runs for re-election. There'll be nobody running or visiting New Hampshire on the Democratic side anyways in 24.
Right.
Republicans have already said, we will honor the first in the nation. They're all going to campaign in New Hampshire. We'll have our politics and eggs and have all of those candidates. But going to South Carolina, obviously it protects the president if he does decide to run for re-election, because that's the state that gave him the nomination, and he came in 5th in New Hampshire. So that's not a state that he really likes campaigning in. But it also gives a boost to the vice president, right? That if she decides to run in the future, maybe even 24, South Carolina is going to be very, very good for her. That's good news, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're Kamala Harris, you look at there are two ways, I think two ways to look at South Carolina, but one of them is very, very important in terms of being a potential positive for Kamala Harris, which is the majority of voters in Democratic primaries it's often African American. It's about 50-50. And then the majority of the African American voters in Democratic primaries in South Carolina are women. So just from a pure demographic makeup, you're talking about a pretty significant share that are black women, who are the most loyal voters in the Democratic Party. You just look at numbers if you look at gender and racial breakdowns, that's the most consistent set. The sort of downside for her is that she has to figure out how to win over a Biden coalition that I think is largely based on moderate whites and African American voters who believe that moderate whites like Joe Biden are the best candidates for the general election, or at least they did in the last election. That's not to make the black community monolithic. There are a lot of different reasons people voted for Biden, but one of them among African American voters I talked to in the last election was that they felt like he was the most likely to beat Trump, and that was so his coalition is an unusual one politically, right? But it's also one that's very important to Democrats who win, which is essentially the vast majority of African American voters and moderate whites. Kamala Harris has a lot of work to do with moderate white voters if she wants to win a Democratic nomination, and a lot of other voters. But I would say if she's running as an incumbent vice president or a former vice president, she will be in a much better place, and South Carolina lines up much better for her than Iowa or New Hampshire does.
What whispers do you hear on the Hill from Democrats? Do they want the president to run for re-election?
I think they wish they had another option that they felt was sure to beat Trump, if Trump is the Republican nominee, which of course is still up in the air. If you look at the polling among Democrats, it's, Biden is still not the favorite person. The percentage of Democrats that want him to run for re-election is, about what it looked like the last time around. Percentage of Democrats who picked him first. That said, they will all vote for him if Donald Trump's the Republican nominee. I think if it looks like Trump is going to be the nominee, nobody's going to jump in against Joe Biden. If it looks like DeSantis or Youngkin or one of the younger set of Republicans can be the nominee, all bets are off. I think that most of the Democrats think that that's a tougher race for Biden.
Mm-hmm. If the president were not to run for re-election, what names do you hear out there that would be interested in running?
Yeah, I don't think there's any scenario in which Kamala Harris doesn't run for president if Biden leaves. Again, sitting vice president of the United States, Joe Biden ran for president twice before, thought about it several other times, never did particularly well, and then he was the former vice president running for president and suddenly was the front runner in the race. And I think, Kamala Harris would start as the front runner in a Democratic nomination race. Maybe not by much, but I think that she's absolutely somebody that you put immediately in that basket. I think Cory Booker is somebody who'd be looking strongly at it. I think Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, who ran last time. Amy Klobuchar, the Minnesota senator, who ran last time. I think some of the governors would be looking hard at it. So Gavin Newsom from California, J.B. Pritzker from Illinois. This name never I shouldn't say never gets thrown out, because it's thrown out so little, I find it weird. Gretchen Whitmer, the two-term governor from Michigan, is somebody that I think would be looking at that. So I don't think there's any lack of names. I think that very few of them have the national name identification that you would like to start with. Mm-hmm. I mean, look who wins our presidential races in recent years. It's people with big celebrity to start with.
Mm-hmm. One name that people talk about here in New England is Gina Raimondo.
Yes.
Secretary of Commerce.
I mean, we're sitting in the financial center here, and it seems pretty clear to me she would very much like to be the Secretary of the Treasury as well. Maybe at the same time. I don't know if you can do that.
I think she was seriously mentioned for Secretary of Treasury, but I think some of the unions in particular were very vociferous in saying that we may not support that nomination. But President Trump has rolled out his campaign in the last 3 weeks. How do you think he's doing?
I think he's not doing it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's no evidence of an actual campaign. Right. I was in New Hampshire talking to folks. They don't see any campaign there. Talk to folks in South Carolina, Nevada, Iowa. Like, there's no actual campaign going on. What we've had instead is some Trump-style controversy. Right, he's having dinner with Kanye West or Ye, or the artist formerly known as Kanye. I mean, whatever you want to. And Nick Fuentes. And people are like, "Who the hell is Nick Fuentes?" Right? But turns out the guy's got some pretty extreme views. So, Trump's doing that, and he's making all he's talking up Elon Musk, and all these sort of like distraction type things are going on that keep Trump's name in the news. And then you have the midterm. Where Herschel Walker, you end up having that runoff where Herschel Walker loses, which kind of reminds people of the November midterms. I think it's been a rough start for Donald Trump. But whether that matters or not, it's so hard to gauge with him what matters, because his level of support has been, if not consistent, there is a persistent support from him among a certain percentage of the Republicans. So he's not. He doesn't have to lift as much of a finger.
The courts have agreed to release his tax returns. Ways and Means will have access to it. Chairman Richie Neal here from Springfield. What did they do with it?
I was about to say, does anybody know Richie Neal? Anybody want to see if they can get the taxes for me? Because I would love to report on what they look like.
Yeah, I know. What do they do with it, though?
I mean, I think it's a big question, right? That we haven't really seen much leaking about it. So it doesn't look like the purpose, at least for the short term, is to tell people like me about it. They only got a few years, so I'm not sure that it's going to have a ton of utility to them.
So, President Trump, some people thought he announced as early as he did to scare everybody off from even considering running. I'm in, sucks up all the oxygen in the room. But it doesn't seem to be that way, right? You're hearing other candidates saying, it's just a matter of time, but they're going to get in.
Mike Pence is doing 2 events in New Hampshire today.
Okay.
Mike Pompeo's been up there.
Yeah, we had him.
Nikki Haley's out looking. The 2 governors, Youngkin and DeSantis, are, both basically saying they're going to wait till after their legislative sessions to make some sort of, I mean, they're not personally saying that, but their people are saying that. I think you're going to get a crowded Republican field. if one gets in, 12 will get in. And the problem for the Republicans right now is that in order, at least for the Republicans who would like to see Trump defeated, you need there to only be one, right? Maybe not only one candidate, but only one that really has support. Because once you start trifurcating, I don't know what comes after trifurcating, but fourfurcating, fivefurcating. I'm going to be careful how I say fourfurcating. And but once you start doing that, it becomes a lot harder because he has that very strong base.
It's a repeat of 2016. You have 17 candidates, and all he needs is 35%.
Yeah.
He's the nominee, and he was in 16. 24, you got 5, 6, 7 candidates. Somebody said the other day the Republican Party is like 10% will never ever vote for Donald Trump. 30, 35 will always stay with him, and the other 50 or 55 will say, we're looking for somebody. But as long as he has that 30, 35, that's pretty powerful, isn't it, to be the nominee?
Yeah, even in the Democratic primary, you saw Joe Biden had about 33% of the Democratic primary electorate from day one, through the South Carolina primary, and then everything kind of coalesced behind him. There was the establishment moved in behind him. But even in a Democratic primary, we have proportional representation with the delegates. 33% was enough in a crowded field to basically win. In the Republican primary, it's even easier because they have so many states that are either winner take all for the delegates or winner take most, where it's disproportionately awarded to the winner of each state, even with a plurality. So just the rules alone really favor a candidate like Trump, who has that really core committed base, even if it's 30, 33, 35%. Right.
Talk to us about the speaker's fight.
Oh.
That looks very interesting, to say the least. He's struggling, Kevin McCarthy, to get his 218. They claim, you know them better than I do, 5 of them, 5 Republicans are pretty adamant and not supporting him at all. Whether it's Andy Biggs, or is it Bob Good, Matt Gaetz, Chip Roy. How serious you think they are not voting for him at all?
I think they're dead serious.
Dead serious.
Yeah, can things change? Like Kevin McCarthy's got, what are we, December 12th? He's got about 23, 24 days to fix this. But the problem is that there are a lot of people that don't want him to fix it. And I don't think that group of 4 or 5 that are out there publicly are the extent of the opposition to him. So we'll see what happens over the next few weeks.
You think there's more?
I think there's more. I also wonder what happens when somebody relatively early in the alphabet names Donald Trump as their choice, and the pressure that puts on other Republicans. Because the way the speaker votes, this is fascinating because this kind of thing doesn't happen everywhere, and I hope I'm not reiterating stuff you guys know, but they have a roll call on the House floor, and everybody has to stand up and say the name of the person that they want for speaker. It doesn't have to be somebody who was nominated. They could name anybody. They could name Jim. They could name me. They could name Matthew Bartlett, who just walked in late. Hi, Matthew.
Yeah. 8 o'clock's tough for me.
Yeah. I only call out Matthew because he's the reason I'm here, and so thank you, Matt, for helping connect us. But they stand up and they call out the names of the candidates that they want for Speaker of the House, and you have to have a majority of those who are present and voting. And so it's a public exercise. It's not a secret ballot. And people can have pressure put on them by who gets named as a candidate. We haven't really seen that recently. But there have been times in our history where we went, I think it was 133 ballots at one point about 150 years ago before they came to a speaker. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think Kevin McCarthy has a lot of work to do over the next 3 weeks to get the votes together.
If not Kevin McCarthy, then who is waiting in the wings?
That's a great question. There is no answer, but because the style of vote, as you know, that it's not a binary like an election where it's like one candidate or the other. They go yay or nay on McCarthy, and then maybe they go yay or nay on McCarthy again. He doesn't get knocked out of the race by virtue of they just keep voting until somebody gets a majority of those present voting, and that could take days. It could take weeks. There have been mentions of some members who may be well liked or well respected across the conference. Tom Cole, who's the Rules Committee leader for the Republicans, is well liked, I think, by all factions, well respected. He's somebody I could see in that role, but he's also in McCarthy's inner circle. So, the only chance that would happen would be if McCarthy had stepped aside at some point.
Do you see a Democrat voting for McCarthy?
I don't see a Democrat voting for McCarthy. Could I see one Democrat voting for McCarthy? Maybe, but I really think the Democrats don't. First of all, they don't want to let him off the hook. They don't like him. He doesn't have relationships across the aisle. The closest he has, I think, is and this is a little bit dated, but he was pretty close to Steny Hoyer, the majority leader for a long time. But even to the extent that there are people that like him, they're not going to help him. Then they got to go back to their constituents to explain why did they vote for this Republican speaker. Our primary politics are so vicious. This is the one vote that's the hardest to go explain if you go across the aisle. You just voted for somebody in the other party to lead the institution. It's hard to see that happening.
In January, with the Republicans taking over the House, Jim Jordan will be the chairman of Judiciary. He's going to start the hearings on Hunter Biden and James Biden. Is there a shadow campaign going on with Democrats to protect the president?
Oh, absolutely. So you've got multiple outside groups that have risen up, and they are pouring money and energy into not only defending the president but attacking the attackers, right? To say we're going to go after Jim Jordan and James Comer of Kentucky, who's the oversight guy. One of the things that's interesting about this speaker race is that Jim Jordan can't really move forward. None of these guys can move forward until they actually get named and their staffs get built and they get the money together for their committees, which means they basically have to have a Speaker of the House to get anything done. That's the first step in anything. So it'll be interesting to watch all that. The Democrats have a sort of defense mechanism. They're still fighting over, who's going to lead them on committees, on the, particularly on the oversight committee. There's been this battle between a few of the members, Jamie Raskin from Maryland and Steve Lynch from Massachusetts, and Jerry Connolly from Northern Virginia.
Boston guy.
Yeah, Boston guy. I know. He's got the accent. It's like he says he's from Virginia, and you expect him to sound like Thomas Jefferson, but he definitely sounds more like John Adams.
He's from West Roxbury. Yeah. Talk about Senator Sinema. What's that caused in the caucus room of the Democrats in the Senate?
People continue to look at Senator Sinema quizzically. They're trying to figure out what's going on, right? What are you doing? As far as the Congress goes, I don't think it makes much of a difference. She's going to continue to. She says she doesn't go to caucus meetings, so technically she doesn't caucus with the Democrats, but she's going to continue to get her committee assignments from them. She's going to continue to vote with the Democrats 90% of the time. Joe Biden has said that his agenda is the most expansive and productive of any president since George Washington. Whatever it is, they Lyndon Johnson sometimes, FDR sometimes, since the building of Rome. Whatever it is that this agenda is being. But the point that I'm making about that is that Kyrsten Sinema voted for all of it, for all of the. For the Sturm and Drang over how she wasn't a Democrat and she was tearing their party apart and whatever. At the end of the day, the thing that Joe Biden is saying is the greatest thing since sliced bread is the thing that Kyrsten Sinema voted for. So I don't think any of that really changes functionally. I think, the question's going to be, because she's now holding the Democrats in Arizona hostage, does Democratic leadership try to clear the field of Democrats in Arizona in 2024 if she runs, and let her run as an independent with the support of Democrats that don't like her now? Do Biden and Chuck Schumer help her rebuild herself over 2 years and make Ruben Gallego the congressman and Greg Stanton the congressman stand down? Or do they risk losing that seat to a Republican as the Democrats and the independents that the Democrats need to win split between Sinema and whoever the Democratic nominee is? So, I think it's a politically savvy move, but, she's always got surprises.
Yeah. What about a surprise candidate on the Republican side, Kerry Ward?
You're talking about, Kelly Ward. Kelly Ward, yeah. She'd be an interesting addition to the Senate. She's pretty extreme. It has been for a long time. And that's a state where you've seen a negative reaction to candidates of her, of her ideology, or I should say the strength of her ideology, whether they're on the left or the right. This is a state that doesn't really want the people in the middle don't want people on the edges, and that's different than a lot of states, right? So we've seen them recently reject Blake Masters, the Senate candidate. Seen them reject narrowly Carrie Lake, the gubernatorial candidate, who's pretty far out there, election denier. But those margins are pretty small. So if you see a Kelly Ward run, and you see a Ruben Gallego, the Democrat run, or Greg Stanton, the Democratic congressman run, and you see it, Kirsten Sinema, the Senate running, there's a pretty good chance the Republican wins it. Yeah. By the way, no matter the brand of Republican, whether it's a moderate Republican or a conservative Republican or a Trump Republican or whatever label you want to put on somebody.
There seems to be some criticism for the the RNC chair, Rhonda McDaniel. Does she have the votes to be reelected?
It appears that way. So she put out a letter. She had 101 people on her first letter of the 168 RNC members saying that they'd support her. She's since added about half a dozen. I just did a story with some of my colleagues looking into that, like how did she do this? And the answer is, sort of member-to-member outreach. She only has 168 constituents, and she's tended to them pretty well over the course of the last 6 years. She's been chair for 6 years, and a lot of these things, as you know, in institutions, a lot of them are personal relationships. There's a person who's in charge listening to you. When you talk to Jim, is he talking to you? Is it listening to you? Is it care what you're saying? I mean, the answer with you obviously is yes. But Ronna McDaniel's done that well. There are some concerns about her. One concern is that she's too close to Donald Trump, and the other concern is that she's too independent from him, too far away from him. But I think what we've heard from the consensus is that she's able to deal with him well. That she's walked the tightrope pretty well between the pro-Trump and anti-Trump factions, and that she is somebody who many of the members believe will be independent if there is a competitive 2024 primary, which is a big concern for a lot of those RNC members, because they're going to have to figure out how to manage that within their own states. They're going to have people coming to them saying, is the RNC treating this fairly? Is the RNC working fairly? They always get bashed as being on one side or the other. So, I think that's been her strength, has been really to kind of balance it well.
So Mike Lindell, my pillow, will not be the chair.
Yeah, no, you could put to bed the Mike Lindell.
Put to bed? Okay. Okay. Maybe we have a chance, for any of you, if you have a question, I could ask even more. Just identify yourself, sir.
Yes.
Mike is right here.
Oh, sorry. I'm Jake Layton, and I'm president of the board of Walker Inc. in Needham.
Right.
My question is, in his farewell tour, Governor Baker was asked what's next, and what he talked about was the growth of independence in across the country. Do you think that is important in any way? And if so, what does it foretell for the political process going forward?
I think even independents right now lean pretty hard one way or the other. I think a lot of independents are people who are sick of the party that they used to be with, or they look at both parties and say they stink, but they still have a pretty hard lean. I mean, we are so. It's not just polarized, it's that we're almost evenly divided and deeply polarized. And it seems to be a cycle that it's almost impossible to get out of. And I'm not sure, maybe the independents are the answer to that. I think there's been a lot of people that have believed that for a long time, and I haven't seen evidence of it, right? That there's going to be this sort of independent revolt. I do think that people who are politically persuadable, that very small percentage, make a huge difference, make a very outsized difference in competitive elections in swing states, whether you're talking about for the Senate. We saw this in 2020, right? This was a Republican, the wins were Republican this year, We saw in the House a movement toward Republicans. There are more Republicans representing Biden districts than there are Democrats representing Trump districts. And the House is like I always think is the better measure for like what the sort of immediate public sentiment is. But the Republicans nominated a bunch of people for Senate races that were not good candidates. And you saw, I think, a number of moderate Republicans and or independents, non-Democrats, voting for Democratic candidates in Pennsylvania. You saw in Arizona, you saw in Georgia, right? So I think it'll be interesting to keep an eye on whether that happens. But my feeling is that I've been hearing for a long time that the independents or the non-party people are really going to change our politics. And I haven't seen that. What I've seen is evidence of the two parties digging in harder and the bases of the two parties moving farther apart from the middle, and more people actually kind of coming to those more extreme positions. I don't know what the answer is, and the answer is probably that one party or the other wins a couple of elections by big margins. I mean, think how incredibly close it's been for 20 years. Basically 20 years. You go back to more than that 2000 election. Down to 530 votes or whatever it was in Florida. And we haven't really gotten out of that. I mean, Obama won 338 electoral votes, I think, the first time. That's like the biggest win we've had in a long time. I just think we're kind of stuck.
Are you keeping an eye on Joe Manchin, and whether he's going to run for re-election?
Absolutely. It's hard to see. Crazier things have happened, but it's hard to see how Joe Manchin wins West Virginia as a Democrat.
Trump carried it by 40 points.
By 40 points, and Manchin kept saying he wasn't going to do the Biden agenda, and much like Kyrsten Sinema, then voted for the Biden agenda. And he said, well, look, we're going to get this permitting reform done. And, the rest of the Democrats were like, no, you're not. And so, he votes for the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation, certainly hasn't eased to the level that would make him more comfortable as a result of that. You got a lot of the climate change stuff that the Biden folks wanted to do. So I think it's hard for him to go to West Virginia voters and say, look, the Democrats are doing what you want them to do. Because I think that the truth is that it's against what the vast majority of West Virginians want. Now, if he were to switch parties and run as a Republican, I think he'd have a shot there. Is it possible that the politics change over the next 2 years, that the economy changes? Absolutely. Right now, I think he's in a tough spot.
Paul Barbaro?
Good morning. Thank you for being with us. Great. Thank you.
There's a mic there for you, Paul.
Very good. I woke up this morning and I heard Chris Sununu's name being tossed around also as a possible candidate, but that's not what I wanted to ask about, unless you want to comment on that.
Happy to do that.
But my main question is how is it that with Trump being so willing to belittle people and call them names if they run against him, he did that for most of the candidates in 2016 and he started to do it now, how can someone stick their nose out, either a moderate or a conservative Republican, who's going to be able to take that first step and speak up and say that they're going to run against Trump? How does that happen? I don't quite get that.
That's a great question. I mean, in a schoolyard, if you feel like there's a bully, often you gang up on the bully. But like what we've been talking about is you gang up in a primary and everybody splits the vote. Like, so that's not really the way to go about it. As far as Chris Sununu goes, I was talking to some friends yesterday about it, and some folks I didn't know up in New Hampshire. You're trying to figure out like what is the audience for Chris Sununu outside of New Hampshire, particularly in early states. Iowans don't know him; they're more conservative. South Carolinians are more conservative than he is. Nevadans don't know him. The Nevada Republican Party is very Trumpy. It's hard for me to see how Chris Sununu is anything other than a favorite son candidate. But I do think that it makes a lot of sense for him to pretend like he's going to run for president and then negotiate with the other candidates about getting out of the race that he never got into, for whatever it is he may want, whether he wants to be an ambassador to something or he wants to be a cabinet member. I don't know if I lost the mic.
There you go.
There we go. Maybe I just need a little higher. Whether he wants to be an ambassador or cabinet member, vice president, chief of staff like his father, he just wants a rule that he doesn't ever have to go to Washington, whatever it is. But I think he's unlikely to run for the reason that he's unlikely to win. I think the candidate that beats Trump, I think we saw a rubric for that from Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia. Trump went after Brian Kemp as hard as he's gone after anybody else. And Kemp ran to his right on policy, knowing that the people to the left of Trump in the Republican Party in Georgia would vote for Kemp. So he was able to kind of squeeze the Trump base to get on both sides of it, to the right of it, to the left of it. And what did he win with, like 70% in the primary? I think there's a lot of room for that, to basically run as a traditional conservative in a way that Trump is not. And I do think the positioning matters probably more than the rhetoric does. I mean, look, you run against Trump, you're going to get beat up. Maybe the best answer is to answer it with like specifics of what it is you plan to do.
Have you been hearing anything from the Republicans in the House and what their agenda is going to be in the new Congress, other than investigations?
I think you got the head of the lead of the agenda is investigations, in part because there's not much that they're going to actually be able to get done, right?
They're going to repeal the IRS, 80,000 agent that we never hired to begin with.
They'll vote for messaging bills, right? Like, so they'll be able to get some of those things through the House. They're not going to get through the Democratic Senate. The president's not going to sign them. I think most of the next 2 years are going to be fought over annual appropriations bills. And that's where most of the action is going to be, and the debt ceiling. And the Republicans in the House are going to want to extract a price for raising the debt ceiling. And they're going to believe, whether this is accurate or not, that if the country goes into default, that Biden will be blamed for it because he's the president. Typically, presidents get blamed for that kind of thing. We'll see, because I think Trump fumbled that once with the government shutdown, where he actually went out and said, you should blame me if the government shuts down, and then the government shut down, and he was surprised that people blamed him. So you never know how these things are going to play out. But I do think the Republicans in the House do have some leverage on the debt ceiling. I mean, Biden's not going to want to see the nation plunged into default. But mostly it's going to be the things that they have to do. You could see Republicans doing some of the permit reform that Manchin wants done, but in the way that they would do it, rather than the way that Manchin would do it, or a moderate Democrat would do it. I think you'll see some efforts to repeal regulations or to alter regulations, and they'll for the most part, use the budget process to try to negotiate those things.
Some of the Republicans have indicated that when it comes to Ukraine, it's no longer a blank check. I mean, would the funding be in jeopardy for Ukraine with the Republicans now in charge of the House?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both Republicans and Democrats in Congress have this divide. One is that they feel some moral obligation to support democracy in Ukraine and fight Putin. I'm not speaking for all of them, but I think that there's a good number of members of Congress that feel that obligation, and at the same time, their constituents don't want to keep sending money to Europe, right? I mean, and that doesn't mean that all their constituents don't want to. It doesn't mean there's no constituents. But compared to what it was like a year ago, the appetite for that among the American public is much different. And it's not surprising that there's a response to that, or that Republicans in Congress will look for an advantage if Biden's out there saying, hey, I want $37 billion more, and they know that the public has either lost interest in it or is less amenable to it than they were before, to use that as an opportunity to say, hey, no, we're going to draw a line here, or we're going to make you be responsible, or we're going to have new accountability. Do I think that the Republican leadership in Congress doesn't want to fund Ukraine? No. But I do think that they want to use the lessened appetite among the American public as leverage.
Do you think Nancy Pelosi will be in Congress this time next year? And if not, where do you think she'll be?
So that's a great question. I don't know, and I should know what is the exact right date for her to leave Congress to best set up her daughter to run for her seat. But whatever that date is the day that Nancy Pelosi will leave, right? I mean, she's not going to sit around. She said, I'm going to be a backbencher. I'm going to be Speaker Emeritus. She's not going to sit around doing nothing, right? Maybe she's helpful to the new leadership to the extent they want. She wants to leave the seat to her kid, and she wants to be an ambassador in Europe. and I've heard the Vatican, I've heard Italy, and the Vatican is occupied, as Jim was noting before,
Joe Donnelly.
by Joe Donnelly, former senator from Indiana. But I also don't know that to what extent her views have been changed by the attack on her husband. She said that affected her decision about sticking around in Congress. It's not clear to me how that was affected, since she'd said she was going to leave and she ended up leaving. But she and her husband are getting older, and they are targets, and that may make them more want to live in another country, or may make them want to less live in another country. But I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up being ambassador to somewhere. This is somebody who has an enormous amount of energy. Like, really,
I know.
I don't think I've ever seen anybody with such an endless reserve of energy, and she's not done. Like, this isn't somebody who's like out there, who's like losing it. Like, people always said, like, look at all the old Democrats, and I'm like, there's plenty of like 50-year-old Democrats in the House who I'm like, that person's like way past their prime. And you look at Pelosi, and you're like, she's like a whirling dervish, right? Like, I mean, she's like everywhere all the time. She hasn't lost a step. So I think she'll remain in public life and probably go overseas.
All right. Kathy, you had your hand up?
I did. Jonathan, thanks for being here, first off.
My pleasure.
Do you want the mic?
Sure. Just curious what your thinking is around climate and the entire agenda. It seems like there's been some mixed messages, some clarity, then a couple steps forward, a few steps back. What's your view on what exactly happens, in the short term, intermediate term? What's your view on what's been happening in terms of messaging and, most importantly, action?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously you saw with the president's Inflation Reduction Act, these things are also Orwellian, right? Like the Very Good for America Act, right? Like, but I mean, look, I think you saw a lot of the things that were part of the Biden agenda on climate change, and then you see how small they are compared to global climate change, right? What is and that's not a knock on the president in particular, but just no piece of legislation is ever going to be big enough to really address the problem. This country is not big enough to address the problem by itself. The world has not shown enough interest in addressing the problem, by itself. So, I mean, I sound like a downer here for the planet, but my concern as a citizen of Washington, D.C. and no place else. But my concern is that, like, if the planet's going to die, it'll be way too late that people respond in the way that would prevent that from happening, right? Like, if there's going to be some sort of catastrophic set of events that threaten our existence, like, we don't have the urgency for that. That's my concern. On the other hand, it seems like the U.S. is making an effort to not make things worse, for a little while. So that I don't know. I feel. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't think enough people in this country for addressing climate change. For those who want to address climate change, I don't think enough of a percentage of the people in this country are willing to sacrifice the sort of daily conveniences in order to really address that. And by the way, that's a long running tension, but the environment and business and daily lives, like, people want to drive their car. I mean, I drove up here from DC and I'm going to drive back to DC. I enjoy driving my car, and if you can find a way that I can do that's environmentally healthy and is equally convenient, like 100% I'm going to do that. I might even sacrifice some of that. But I think the average American isn't ready to really change their lifestyle in ways that are potentially going to help the planet, especially when not every country in the world is abiding by the same things, and they're not, we have a tragedy of the commons with the environment.
The leadership under McCarthy has indicated he's going to remove some Democrats from committees, Adam Schiff and I don't know who else, a couple of them. Your thoughts on how this is going to play over? I mean, is this just going to cause even more divisions between the Demis and the Republicans in the House, or the Demis just going to accept it and say, hey, it's payback, we did the same thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene, we removed her from a committee? But how do you think this is going to play out there?
they're not going to accept it. They'll scream and cry and say it's worse than whatever they did to the Republicans, because that's how the children who make up the House of Representatives tend to behave. I think that Adam Schiff in particular will probably be looking to Chuck Schumer for his committee assignments not too long down the road. Now, actually, there's a competitive race for Senate
Dianne
potentially, but
Feinstein.
he looks like he's in against Dianne Feinstein. So we'll see how that plays out. Yeah, I don't think McCarthy, if he becomes Speaker, can get away with not preventing some of these people on the Democratic side from being on committees. There's a bloodlust on his side, and there's a reason for that, which is that some of them got kicked off of their committees. And and the entire time that I've covered the House, like, there's never been a time prior where one party decided to strip the committee, effectively decided to strip the committee assignments of people on the other party. And we're getting to the point where you'd think that if one of these parties could expel all the members of the other side, they would.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's. We watch all these norms go away, right? And I think our country is operated effectively because we observe, in addition to the rule of law, so many norms of civility and decency and fair treatment, and we watch them all slip away. And both the offender and the punisher, are responsible in some way for this, right? Like, so somebody goes out there and says something, totally obscene, or does something totally obscene, and then the other side says, well, look, we don't think you can, represent the House of Representatives on this committee or whatever. Like, all these are understandable reactions, right? But they are also chipping away at, like, both sides are, like, destroying our norms, and I can't help but think that we in our republic suffer for it.
We have Catherine Clark now going to be the number 2 person in the Democratic side. Now, got elected in 2013. Hakeem Jeffries going to be the next speaker. The Democrats recaptured, got elected to the United States Congress 2013. I mean, these 2 individuals have served 9 years in the United States Congress, and they're about to be the speaker, and the other one's speaker in waiting. Do you ever see anything like this?
No, and nobody really has. I mean, it's been, Hakeem Jeffries has been a decade. There's nobody that's alive that has seen somebody rise from being elected to being the party leader in that short of a period of time, right? Like, yeah. I mean, you have to go back, I forget exactly when, a couple hundred years, but like 150 years, like basically the beginning of majority leaders to see that happen. They did a very good job politically of convincing the Democratic caucus that you didn't have to be old, and that maybe if you've been around for a while, you shouldn't be in leadership, and it's time to move to a new generation. So they must be pretty good at politics. This is not a situation, like a Sam Rayburn or like a Tip O'Neill, where you like work your way up over the years and people come to trust you. It just doesn't. That's not happening more. Part of it's the turnover in Congress. We've just seen an enormous turnover in Congress over here. So there's a lot more of the younger set that's clamoring for power than when I first started covering Congress, you see like a 98% retention rate from year to year. It just doesn't happen like that anymore.
In 2024, 23 Democratic senators are up for re-election, and they're in states that are pretty tough for Democrats to keep: West Virginia, Ohio. Your thoughts on how this is playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Republican Party gets its act together, it should win the Senate. But it's a big if. It's a big predicate, right? I think if you run a rational, sane race against John Tester in Montana, that's a tough race. John Tester's a very good candidate. It's still difficult for a Democrat to win in Montana, right? Both of those House seats, they now have 2 House seats that are both occupied by Republicans, both Senate seats occupied by, one Senate seat by a Republican and one by Tester. I mean, it is a Republican-leaning state, no doubt. But if the Republicans put up a bad candidate against him, he'll win. Sherrod Brown in Ohio, we just saw J.D. Vance win Ohio against Tim Ryan by a comfortable margin, not by half a point. That's a state that a Republican should be able to win. If they put up, Herschel Walker as the candidate in Ohio, they're not going to win that. So we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, I think that you're making out your predictions on this day in 2022 for 2024. The the map's set up pretty well for Republicans.
Right. Other questions? Matt. Thanks for joining us this morning, Matt. Yeah.
I'm not from New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were in the Commonwealth that gave us, 4 presidents, but as Ted Kennedy said, the dream should never die. For so many others, himself, you want to start, Romney, Deval Patrick, Scott Brown maybe, Marty Walsh, there are so many that have maybe had presidential ambitions. But Elizabeth Warren, can you just talk about how she came into 2020, maybe even being the front runner at some point, how she's behaved, since the Biden administration has taken office, and maybe actually, her opportunity in the future.
Sure. The cause endures, the hope lives on, the dream shall never die. Ted Kennedy, 1980 speech. The campaign had died. Jimmy Carter's campaign also died, I think, at that moment. But Elizabeth Warren, to her great credit and detriment, she doesn't change. I think she came into the 2020 race with a real opportunity to be what all of the candidates other than Biden and Sanders wanted to be, which was the candidate between them who could win, the plurality of Democrats and run away with it. And she's the only candidate throughout the 2020 election other than Joe Biden to hold a lead in national polling. She did it for one day. And she got into that place where she was rising, and she was rising between those 2 polls, and then everybody else dragged her down. But she helped. If you recall, she didn't have a plan for health care. The woman who had a plan for everything had decided that health care wasn't going to be the biggest issue among Democrats and didn't devise her own plan. She leaned on Bernie's plan. And then when people got upset with Bernie's plan over some of the things that the unions were upset about, Bernie changed his plan. And she couldn't quite keep up. And she eventually rolls out her own thing, and it's too late. By then she's been crushed between the 2 polls and the other candidates that were trying to be in that place. So that's my sort of analysis of 2020. What she's done since Biden took office is have a heavy hand in who ends up being picked for various jobs. She's always said policy is personnel, right? Who you pick for the jobs is how you end up governing. And I think that she has been very serious about playing that role. And you can look around the administration and see people who are her choices. That doesn't mean everyone Biden picks is somebody that Elizabeth Warren wants, but it does mean that he's been aware of what it is she's interested in, and he has been aware of what it is, what kind of crap she could kick up to cause problems for people. And so I think that's the role she's played. I don't know if you would see her run, if Biden were to say that he wasn't running, I don't know if you'd see her run again in 2024 for president. And maybe that she decides that she wants to stay in the Senate, where she is a big voice on the left, somebody that people pay attention to. Someone that frustrates a lot of her colleagues sometimes, because she's kind of independent-minded. She's very liberal, votes with the Democrats 99% of the time, but she's an independent-minded person, and she doesn't always do what they want. And sometimes she'll call them out and make their constituents angry at them for not doing the things she wants. So, it's a fascinating senator. It's a great question from a gentleman and scholar from New Hampshire.
Who are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, Matt, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right on the Senator's influence in the administration. And you just look at all of the appointments in FCC, SEC, and Treasury, pretty much all candidates that she has, suggested that the administration appoint, and they have been appointed. So she has a major influence on the administration and on, the college loan debt idea really was hers, pushing it. I mean, she wants $50,000 to be the forgiveness, but he did go along with $10,000. But I think she was the influence on that.
Yeah, I mean, agree or disagree, she's a force.
Right.
I don't know how many of the 100 senators each of you can name, but even if you weren't from Massachusetts or nearby, you'd be able to name Elizabeth Warren. right? I mean, she's one of the, 5
Yeah.
or 6 senators that's most easily identifiable across the country.
Just to skip back on Montana, are you watching whether he runs for re-election or not?
John Tester, absolutely, and also
Because he hasn't made a commitment yet.
he has not made a commitment. He was just, I think, on Meet the Press. I should know because I'm at NBC. I think he was just on Meet the Press this weekend and asked about that, and he's,
Yeah.
he's been a little bit coy about it. I mean, I think he's looking at the map and looking at the votes and saying, like, this is, a tough thing, but also it may be that he wants to do something else. Maybe he wants to be in the cabinet. Maybe he wants to run for president at some point. There are a lot of Democrats look at a guy like John Tester that can win in Montana and say that's where the party should be going. My view of presidential candidates is that, like, they're usually the people that can get the most people in their party to like them and the most people outside their party to like them. Like, I think this is pretty simple stuff. Like, who's got, like, mass charisma? Who's likable?
Yeah, right.
Like, that's who wins the presidency, by and large. So maybe Tester's that. I don't know. We have to see him on TV a little more, I guess.
Right. Maybe one final question, and then we'll let all of you and Jonathan leave. Yes, sir?
What happens to Liz Cheney?
Oh, I mean, I think she'll make a lot of money.
Is she done with politics?
I don't think she's done with politics, in part because what she's done is set herself up to run an outside group. So I don't know whether she runs for president or not, but she's already set up outside spending groups, or it's a set of groups, one of which is an outside spending group. She's gonna be able to raise money to influence politics, and will probably continue to do that, and maybe sit on boards, and maybe she will run for president of the United States against Donald Trump. I think that the key for somebody like Liz Cheney, if they ever want to do that, is being able to be on a debate stage with Donald Trump, because that's the only point, right? Like, is she able to be in a place where she can hurt him? It's not that Liz Cheney is going to be the next president of the United States. For every Democrat you can find that loves Liz Cheney today, I can find you one that will happily vote against her tomorrow. So, I think she's going to raise money and use it to influence politics, and if she thinks she can hurt Donald Trump by running for president, she will.
Well, with that, we want to thank John Allen and all of you for being here today.